Welcome back to Tailosive Tech live on YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you're having a fantastic Monday so far. And we have some good news, at least in regards to the Mac, that shipments have been overall growing year over year for Apple, which I realize we don't really document too much. There's not a ton of people talking about Mac shipments these days because, both the laptop and desktop space has somewhat plateaued in terms of like global sales. Like most people who want to buy one have bought one. Smartphones and tablets have kind of found their place in the market, and most people who want one of those have had them. So, where the Mac sits in the overall market is interesting because since they've went away from Intel, and of course the product has gotten much better, it does actually prove it has convinced more people that now is the time to upgrade than before. Seeing around an 8% growth quarter, Q1 in the same period last year, around 6.5 million units shipped, at least according to research groups, because Apple does not disclose these numbers themselves. But as far as just total units delivered and the amount of growth they've seen, they're doing pretty dang well, and they're coming up against bigger players that are seeing declines year over year and not growth, which I think is a good sign because there's all this debate going around on like, was Apple doing the right thing, especially when we've seen how Intel processors have gotten better since the transition has taken place, and Intel's tried their best to say, hey, this chip can outperform an M1 Max, or this chip can do better than an Apple Silicon one. Usually ends up consuming a lot more power in the first place. But at the same time, yeah, I think it's a good thing, and now seeing that Apple, it's directly paying off by switching the transition, and it's increased the total demand for Macs as a whole because battery life, performance, and all that has gotten much better. Yeah, they convinced Sam, exactly. Thank you for your support, J Money. He says, what's your opinion on HomePod Mini sound quality? So I've never owned a HomePod Mini, but I have listened to them in stores and at friends' houses and stuff. And I'm overall very impressed with it. I think it sounds fantastic given the size, considering it's pretty dang small. I can't think of another smart speaker that's in that same size, in that same form factor that sounds better. But I'm also not an audiophile. Despite there are certain times I pick up audio differences in both our car stereo or on the TV, and I'll complain about it, and my wife will say, "I think you're becoming an audiophile. Why do you always pick up those little details? I don't even notice." And I'm like, "Well, I don't think I'm an audiophile because I don't really care about high-end headphones or low latency or high fidelity audio. Even though I've tried it, I don't really pick up the difference, and yet at the same time, there's other little things that I can pick on as well, which is weird. Let's see. Just bought a new M1 MacBook Air with student pricing, only $900. That's great. I still think that's probably the best value Mac you can buy out there. Just in terms of total package, obviously a certified refurbished or student discount M1 Mac Mini. If you're just going for like the cheapest Mac possible, yes, the Mac Mini value is insanely good, assuming you already have a monitor, keyboard, and mouse attached. But especially if you're looking for an all-in-one device, a Mac Mini is going to be stationary. There's no battery, and you need to supply your own keyboard and screen and all that. Whereas just the sheer value of that M1 equipped MacBook Air, especially under $1,000 if you can, with a discount or certified refurbished or something, that is everything you need. You've got your battery, you've got a display, you've got the keyboard, trackpad. It's for all intensive purposes an all-in-one because it's got the whole thing out of the box. 256 gigs of storage, fanless, battery life is still fantastic, and the performance you get out of the M1 chip is still honestly overkill, I think, for most everyday consumers. So I think it's that type of value that was just kind of unparalleled before the transition took place, because the biggest problem I think when Apple was still rocking Intel processors was everyone kind of knew, because they were third party and because it was Intel, exactly how much that processor cost or its thermal limitations. And Intel is trying to make a bunch of processors for lots of different types of computers, so they can't really optimize their chips as well as Apple can, because Apple knows exactly what computers their chips are going into. And because we know how those chips perform, and Apple can say this new Intel processor is now in this MacBook Air, we'd be like, oh, that one? And then we'd look it up and be like, yeah, that one's not very good. Whereas now, thanks to the optimizations of the ARM architecture, it's very, very difficult for you to find any kind of laptop out there that will have equal performance for the price, especially in regards to the MacBook Air selling for under $1,000 for many people these days. So, especially when it comes to battery life, I feel like that's usually where a lot of Windows machines are lacking. And M1 chip is, yeah, pretty hard to beat, to be honest. This chip plugged in a desktop with 8 fans consuming 1.21 gigawatts can beat an M1 Max. See? Apple sucks. Right. I can't believe that Intel was willing to run those commercials hating on Apple while simultaneously in interviews they were like, we hope to win Apple back someday by making better chips. I was like, like that's ever gonna happen, like have a very hard time grasping that even if Intel somehow was able to make chips that consumed less power and performed better than Apple Silicon, do you think Apple would go back after the marketing campaign that Intel ran against them? Or just for the fact alone that Apple can brand and have more control over their own silicon and the operating costs? I mean, come on. If Intel is selling stuff to Apple, it's always going to have a bigger profit margin for Intel than Apple just being more vertically integrated and designing the chips themselves. It's just going to be far more profitable for Apple to use their own silicon, even if we ignore the performance argument. So I'm glad to see it's paying off, and I'm glad that there seems to be a large migration of people, at least, or a decent number of Mac users out there that are like, yeah, I think now's the time to upgrade. The M1 chip feels like a big step forward. This architecture seems like it's going to get a lot of support for a long time. And potentially even a lot of PC people out there that were not interested in Mac before are now seeing the performance gains and the battery life and, all of the advantages that Mac OS is rocking, which is essentially being great at all things a computer can be great at, except gaming, but that's okay. And then everything else, you'll be fine. If you have a desktop PC, you should buy a Mac Mini just to have a secondary PC or try it out. If you're intending to use it for gaming, I won't recommend that. But yeah, pretty much anything else, I'd probably support it. I think for the new MacBooks, they could make the function keys smaller and then fit a touch bar. I'm not buying a new MacBook for a while. I just got a 16-inch 2020, but I'd need a touch bar to even coincide. Well, you might not be upgrading for a while then, because I have a feeling the touch bar is not going to stick around. I also think it would probably be fairly redundant to have both function keys and a touch bar. I'm trying to visualize that, and it looks cluttered and complex, and they kind of by default want to be what the function keys already do. So I don't know. I don't see Apple doing that. I still think it would have been nice if they had the touch bar as an option at checkout. For a while there, they used to sell MacBook Pros. It's like you could buy this cheap one with function keys, and this higher end one gains the touch bar. So you kind of had a choice. I believe there was even a time where you could get function keys and still 4 Thunderbolt ports. But that was way back in 2016. That one didn't last very long. So I can't tell if my memory is fading or if that was a real tear. But I just remember there used to be a lot of function key MacBook Pros alongside the touch bar. But just allowing it as an upsell, just, saying you can choose at checkout for $300 if you would like a touch bar or not. I would pay it. I know not everybody would, and probably very few would, but I would be very, very happy if I could change one thing about my current MacBook Pro, just the touch bar. That'd be solid. That'd be perfect. I want little displays on each key. Programmable keyboard. Oh my God. Can you imagine the price of that thing? Oh, and the complexity of each individual key being its own display. Oh, my goodness. It'd probably be cheaper and easier to just go full out touch display on the bottom. Just have an iPad attached to a MacBook display. Ugh, my goodness. I would love a separate keyboard for desktop with touch bar. I would too. It's like if it was a separate thing you could buy, it doesn't have to come with the Mac, but if it's an accessory you can tag along with, that'd be perfect. They should have gotten the MacBook from 2015 and shove an M1 chip inside it and sell it for 900. Oh, do you mean the 12-inch one? Yeah, I like that form factor a lot. I remember reviewing it, but the specifications and the performance was just god-awful. Man, it was slow. But it was ahead of its time, really, because that was back when Apple was trying to make an entire Mac without any fans. And that resulted in there being no fans because it was just too dang slow. But for general web browsing and just doing like basic computer tasks, yeah, there's still to this day never been a laptop that thin, that lightweight, at least from Apple, There may be some others by some other PC company, but I really, yeah, I agree. It'd be nice if they went back to that form factor and started trying again with like the fanless architecture, which they've now proven can work on the M1 MacBook Air, and the iPad Pros have the M1 chip, and obviously no problem there thanks to iPad OS being useless. But I think the M2 chip in a MacBook Air, which is rumored to be smaller and more compact and lightweight, is probably going to be the closest we get to Apple returning to that original 12-inch MacBook design. Something more compact and thin and quiet. You know, operation is dead silent. But yeah, that 12-inch form factor was perfect for the ARM transition. That would have been a great time to introduce Apple Silicon on the Mac, but no, didn't do it. Oh boy. I personally don't see a need for it, but I remember drawing a concept with 10 buttons with programmable screens and mapped functions of the Model 3 and Y screen. Really? That's interesting. I feel like there's only so much you can do with a tiny screen on a key. Um, Under the Model 3 and Y. But it probably doesn't need to be incredibly complicated if you wanted them to be programmable. If it's a button at the end of the day, you're going to be covering it up with your finger and pushing it. So making it maybe more like e-ink instead of like a full-on display like the touch bar was, but just making something where the pixels are basically, you know, a single color on and off, and you can rearrange that key. But I think I think Apple's had patents like that in the past, I remember, where like each key would have its individual display, but they never turned into anything, which doesn't honestly surprise me, because I have to imagine most people, even with fully customizable and, you know, full displays on their keyboards, ended up using them in their default configuration anyway, because at the end of the day, you need all those letters. You're not going to be remapping your alphabet very often, or I don't think that many people would, and you still kind of want your shift key there, and you want your command key there, and your option key there. So I think the approach of the touch bar was the most logical, because that part of the keyboard was kind of ripe for customization and options, whereas the rest of the keyboard, I guess some people might have their use cases for customizing it, but we know how Apple is with customization, and I think they've found from trial and error and testing things with consumers that a lot of people don't like that kind of that high a volume of customization anyway. You know, a lot of Android people brag about how much more customizable their phone is, but if you go around and look at people's Android phones, they pretty much keep them, for the most part, how they were out of the box. You know, we've got the Fandroid argument on YouTube, and that they get really into the custom packs and custom arrangements, but everybody I know that has an Android basically keeps the default settings, the default app launcher, and the default home screen, and a lot of them the default wallpaper even, because they just don't want to fuss around with customization. It's an interesting concept because it gives people more options and gives people more control over how the OS looks and behaves, but at the same time, the concept of customization inherently implies that the way the phone or the way the device is set up, people aren't really comfortable with it and want to spend time on the device fixing it to their liking. Some people may like that and some people may not. It's, you know, kind of like making food for yourself at home, and make, you know, the recipe and customize everything exactly the way you like it, versus going to a restaurant and just kind of ordering something. Is it going to have the exact right ingredients and the exact right portions of everything you want? Probably not, but sometimes people just like to order food and have it come to them and it's made and they can just start eating it. And that's probably how a very large number of people view their phone, laptop, and keyboard even. It's just like, I don't need to individually remap and reprogram every single keyboard layout depending on the application I'm in. I just want a keyboard that works. And you tell people, in this application, you know, the B key is the cut key and this key does that. And, you know, with games, it's WASD. So W is forward, A is left, D is right, S is backwards. And people just kind of get used to that. So the concept of putting time and money into those individual keys, even though you're going to push over them and not really look at it that closely anyway. Do you think iPhone chips on iPads can run macOS smoothly? It hasn't been done, but I bet they could, honestly, because macOS has been running on devices much older than the M1 chip. You know, Apple used to run fairly recent generations of macOS on pretty crappy machines. Like, I'm blanking. I don't think Mac OS Monterey can run on the 12-inch MacBook, but can it? Man, I should know that off the top of my head, huh? But even then, like, there are very old, whatever the latest, oldest Mac is that runs Mac OS Monterey, those old Macs from 2015 and 2016, they do not really have that great a CPU or GPU, and yet they're still capable of running the latest version of Mac OS. So if Apple can optimize Mac OS to run on that old hardware with the x86 architecture, and we know what the performance is of the A15 chip, and compare that to the M1, yeah, I'm pretty confident if the hardware was here, if you could put uh, Thunderbolt on the iPhone, or dock it with an external monitor so that the iPhone actually had the throughput to output to a bigger display. Yeah, I bet the A15 chip could handle Mac OS. It would probably not be as fast as the M1 when it came to export times or gaming performance and that kind of thing. Again, M1 is still going to be better, but is it possible? Especially if you were just doing it for general web browsing and iMessage and light tasks like that. Yeah, absolutely. But that's all theoretical on my end. But Halami brings up a good point. The A12Z dev kit ran Mac OS, and that was on an iPad CPU. And I'm pretty confident now that the A15 chip is at least close to the performance of the A12Z, if not better. So yeah, if they ran Mac OS on the A12Z chip, of course they could do it on an A15. Okay, so the 2016 12-inch MacBook or newer, yeah. So the 2016 12-inch MacBook, that processor, I'm fairly confident in saying performs worse than the A15, probably worse than the A13 chip, to be honest. Um, let's see. Ninja says any MacBook from 2015 and earlier runs Monterey. Yeah, that's fair. I once tried a Galaxy Note 10 Plus. Yeah, I was gonna say 2015 and earlier. It's like the Apple One can run Monterey. Yeah, I was thought 2015 and later. That makes more sense. Anyway, I tried a Galaxy Note 10 Plus for a few days, and I was overwhelmed with the amount of options the phone has for customization. That's something I think Samsung has kind of prided themselves for, is just like infinite options and all kinds of features stuffed to the gill that most people will probably never use. Um, let's see. It would be nice if I could have something more useful than a dedicated dictation button on the M1 Pro MacBook, but other than that, I think the function key buttons are fine. Yeah, I mean that's one of the things I liked about the touch bar, is like if you want a dictation there, you can. If you want a do not disturb button, you can. Or if you want it to be something else, probably the most useful things I miss about the touch bar was I watch a lot of YouTube, especially when I'm working. But even when I'm not working, or I'm just like chatting with people online, if I pull up a YouTube video, I want to activate picture in picture. So it comes out of that window, and then I can go do other things, and the video is still playing. The touch bar, when you would open a YouTube video, would just have a single button right there ready for you that you could tap once, and boom, you're in picture. I don't have that anymore, so now I have to double click the video with two fingers. Double click, go down to picture in picture, click that, and enter it. I also just felt much faster if I was adjusting volume with a touchscreen. So if I was playing a video and it was too loud, I could grab the volume slider and swing it down to the very bottom really quickly. Whereas right now, you basically have to button spam or hold it down. You got to go, or you just press and hold, and you're kind of limited by how quickly the volume changes. With the touch bar, I felt really quick and snappy with that. I could just be like, quick, adjust it. Or if the volume's all the way off, I can grab the slider, adjust it very fast. Also predictive text, because I do use iMessage on my MacBook pretty frequently, and if you don't know how to spell something, or you see the word you're looking for pop up on the touch bar, it was just one quick little grab away. Or if you're on Twitter, or again texting people, having the emoji selection right on that screen. Oh, I'm just talking about it right now is making me miss it. It's just, I'm more and more upset that they got rid of it the more I think about it. Maybe I should stop talking about it. I don't want to think more about the touch bar. For Scott, it froze and crashed all the time. It never did that for me. It's so weird. There is a dedicated mute button, but I'm not usually, if I'm watching a video and the audio is too loud, I'm not usually trying to mute it. I'm trying to lower it. And if I want to lower it quickly, I could lower it a lot faster with the touch bar. I just felt like I could get to the volume I wanted the MacBook to be a lot faster than the button spamming thing. Um, I missed that feature. Oh yeah, asking for the ability to reply with the notification on Mac. Someone told me you can reply to it if you hold it down, and I did that and it did not work. So I'm not sure what they were referring to. But yeah, there used to be a fairly easy way if someone texted you on Mac OS, you could just click the notification and a little reply option showed down. And now it just brings up the whole application. So maybe I just haven't figured it out the right way. Someone said, oh, there's a way to do it, but I can't figure it out. I don't know why they needed to change that. Whatever the proper way of replying to the text is, why did they need to change it? Why can't I just click it once? And that should be enough. It shouldn't have to be more complicated than that. Um, Hoping we get a new M2 MacBook Air with a new design at Dub so that I could upgrade from my M1 MacBook Pro with the outdated design. I love how the new Pros look, but they're way too much. Yeah, I guess 2000 is quite a bit. They used to be a lot less than that. Yeah, I guess you should probably expect the M2 MacBook Air to be an upgrade even over an M1 MacBook Pro. There was talk for a little while there that Apple was going to do an M2 chip MacBook Pro, but it would be the same design. That that was rumored to come out at the March event, and it didn't happen. So I don't know if it's been postponed or if that rumor was just bust entirely. Uh, but yeah, honestly, even if we ignore the existence of the M2 MacBook Air, whether or not that comes in June, I'm still predicting it'll come out in October. But I'm disagreeing with Mark Gurman, and Mark Gurman's gotten a lot right. So I'm on the boat that I'm on the camp that the M1 MacBook Air is far worth the money, and I do not recommend the M1 MacBook Pro unless you're just a super diehard Touch Bar fan. I can kind of get that if you're like me or like my friend Nick on the Tech Podcast. He's just a diehard Touch Bar fan and he loves that thing. That's the only reason you should be getting it. I don't think the battery life is that different. Regardless, if you're going on a trip, you're going to need to take a charger with you. The M1 MacBook Pro battery is good, but so is the M1 MacBook Air. It's still incredibly good for the size of the laptop and how efficient the chip is. You're going to get decent battery life out of either, and I don't think the MacBook Pro battery life is enough better to justify the cost. And the fans, I have not seen any like concrete or legitimate testing where the fans on the MacBook Pro make the M1 chip perform much different from the MacBook Air. I did a performance test for my use cases of, exporting and working on 4K at 60 footage all the time that's color corrected in ProRes. And I did it once on the M1 MacBook Air. No problem. Still very quick. And did it once on the 24-inch iMac, which has two fans. And they did not show really any advantage. I did not notice the M1 chip performing any better with the fans. So I know some YouTubers have done Geekbench or comparison tests, and sometimes the one with the fans can get a little bit higher, but it's never very much. It's never like a night and day difference. It's always marginal. It's always just a little bit faster with the fans. And I think for day-to-day use, you're not gonna, if you care that much about performance, you should not be buying the entry-level MacBook Pro anyway. So even in today's world, I'm gonna recommend MacBook Air. Just because I think it's such a good deal, and the performance is darn near identical to the more expensive MacBook Pro, which is heavier and bulkier and whatever. They both have two Thunderbolt ports. They both have a headphone jack. They both have the M1 chip. I think the MacBook Pro display is a little bit different, but it's a tech spec thing. It's not something you'll probably even notice. Let's see. I never had issues with the touch bar except for a week ago where I opened my MacBook and the bar was just off. I didn't want to restart my MacBook because I was in the middle of watching stuff. Then it worked the next day after leaving it asleep. That's so bizarre. It's so crazy to me how many people have had issues and how I never had any. I can't think of a time in my life where I was like, wait, what's wrong with my touch bar? Do you think it'll go M1 to M2 and M1 Max to M2 Max, or M1 Max to M2? So I'm trying to understand what you're asking, Aaron, but my general answer is that the M2 chip will be faster than the M1, but not faster than the M1 Pro or M1 Max. That's a Pro chip and a Max chip and, an Ultra chip. The M2, from what we've read about it, is in the same way you get an upgrade from, like, in your iPhone, you see a 14 to a 15 chip. That doesn't mean that Same with like, well, let me think of a better example. Go back a little further. So the A12 chip was faster than the A11. It was pretty good. And then Apple shortly after that introduced the A12X chip, right? That was the one they put in the 2018 iPad Pros, and it kind of shocked everyone how fast Apple Silicon was getting, because even though the Mac transition to Apple Silicon hadn't started yet, that A12X chip they were shipping in iPads was faster than some of the Intel chips on the Mac line that Apple was selling. So people were like, "Oh my god, like Apple Silicon is actually, catching up with everybody else." So that doesn't mean that when the A13 chip came out later, that the A13 was better than the A12X. Maybe in some single core stuff, but for the most part, the A12X was still a faster chip because it had more cores and it was meant for iPad Pro hardware, not iPhone hardware. So even though the number was higher of the A13, it's still an iPhone CPU. It's still it's meant for a smartphone. It has less cores. It's not a beefy GPU, and the A12X was still faster. A little bit down the road, the A series of chips ended up surpassing the A12X eventually, which I expect a similar thing. Probably not with the M2, but maybe the M3 or M4 chip. Maybe those entry level chips will start to outperform the M1 Pro or M1 Max. But for the most part, if you have an M1 chip in a current Mac, whether it's the iMac, the Mac Mini, MacBook Air, those I think will be replaced with the M2. And the M2 chip will be better, but not as good as an M1 Pro or M1 Max. And then in the future, they'll make an M2 Pro and M2 Max. That's what'll go in the higher end MacBook Pros, the 14-inch and 16-inch. Um, let's see. You just changed my mind about selling my MacBook Pro. I love the Touch Bar. Oh man, we're getting all the Touch Bar fans in here. Do you think they'll ever re-add the 12-inch MacBook in a 13-inch form, which is more practical for 2022 as a budget model, possibly with colors or not? I think that's what the M2 MacBook Air is going to be. I think people are just hung up on that naming. Apple's tried it several times where they just have a regular MacBook and it never sticks. It never stays around very long. They tried with some plastic models that were lower price and more budget friendly. They were like, here, have a more affordable Mac, and that didn't stick around. They sold it for a couple years and then they got rid of it. And then in 2015, they tried again, let's do the 12-inch MacBook, and it's smaller and more compact than even the MacBook Airs of the time. And no, everyone was like, the performance isn't there, and it's too expensive. So no matter how Apple's tried it, they can't seem to get much of a following with the regular MacBook terminology. So I think Apple's pretty comfortable with, in terms of MacBooks, you just have the Air, because that's iconic and recognizable. People know the term MacBook Air, that stands out. Same with MacBook Pro. There's a lot of people these days that don't even realize there are MacBooks that don't end with the term Pro. They just think, oh, if it's an Apple laptop, it must be a MacBook Pro, because those those three words just kind of go together now, and they've been around for so long. So I don't think there's really much room or need for a separate tier that's not an Air or a Pro. It probably made more sense back in the day where like a thinner, lighter laptop was more expensive. So you had the option of making a thicker, more affordable laptop. But in today's world, you can make really thin, really compact devices that are still pretty dang cheap. So like the MacBook Air is the cheapest MacBook they sell. That's really thin, that's really light, and with the ARM architecture now, you can develop Apple Silicon, which honestly doesn't cost Apple much to make. All the money is spent in research and development. After that research and development phase, the manufacturing of the chips is really not that much. That's why they're comfortable putting the A15 chip in a $400 iPhone, and they're comfortable putting the M1 chip and all of its performance and power in a $600 iPad. Apple's fine with that because they're already mass producing the chips, so diverting a few into cheaper products doesn't really mean anything. They get to boast about how this $600 iPad is faster than 95% of PCs or something. They can brag about that and it won't cost them much. So the concept that they could make a smaller, lighter laptop is like, well, that's what the Air is. That's the M2 equipped MacBook Air coming later in the year, whenever it is, June or October. That's what you're asking for. A thinner, lighter MacBook with, a 13-inch display and thin bezels. That's probably what it'll be, is just 12-inch MacBook updated with ARM architecture. But they'll call it a MacBook Air. Um, Apple can have an iPad model just called iPad, but they can't do a similar naming strategy for the iPhone and MacBook. I know it's different, it's weird, but it just hasn't caught on. I mean, they introduced the regular iPad, and it was super cheap because I think when they do a non-laminated display, they can bypass some complexities in manufacturing. And ever since they introduced it, it's been here. And they've updated it every single year since 2017, March of 2017. That was when they introduced it. $329. All these years later, it's still here. And every year they give it a new chip and one extra little feature of like, okay, now it supports the Apple Pencil, or now we increase the size of the display a little bit, or now it has a center stage, or now it has a little bit better camera on the back. It's always just the minor upgrades, but MacBooks are just inherently more complicated. If you include a trackpad, that drives the cost up. If you include a keyboard, that drives the cost up. And if you include a hinge, hinges cost money. Look at foldables. And a display of that size, and it's not easy to do a non-laminated MacBook display, at least with Apple's current standards. If they do a display on a laptop, they want it to be laminated, and it's got to be thin because Apple has this requirement that all of your laptops be easy to open with one hand and one finger, basically. You can open up a laptop, and they typically are going to require beefier speaker systems. They're going to have more I/O. So I personally think the MacBook Air in its current state is about as cheap as Apple is comfortable with the Mac line getting. If you're the type of person that's like, well, $900 or $800 is still too much for me, I want an Apple laptop that's less, they're going to tell you to get an iPad. That's the purpose of the iPad line, is to like serve that sub Mac market in their view. So yeah, they've tried it with the regular MacBook terminology several times though, and they've killed it off. And they've been like, yeah, it doesn't work. Oh, let's try it again. Nah, it doesn't work. So I don't think it's coming back personally. What about MacBook SE? Again, it's just like, what do you do with it? Like, is it thicker than a MacBook Air and therefore it costs less to make, or you put in worse silicon? You're going to put the M1 chip in the iPad Air for $600, but if you do a $600 MacBook, it has to have the A15 chip or something. It's like the silicon is not the expensive part, so you would have to compromise on other things that Apple is probably not comfortable compromising on. The budget iPad or the iPhone SE is because they get to reuse these really old designs. They're kind of already reusing old designs with the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air already. But there's only so much cost savings you can have with a laptop. It just doesn't scale as well as an iPhone or iPad getting cheaper and cheaper. Do you miss the curved edges of previous iPhones? I do think they were more comfortable. Whenever I pick up an older iPhone that still has the curved chassis, yeah, it fits better in the hand. But I do think this looks cooler. I like the flat edge design just aesthetically. I think it looks more modern and minimalistic and cleaner because it doesn't refract as much light. It's not enough for me to like want to go back. I'm not like, I kind of want to try an old iPhone. I would much rather have 120 hertz at the end of the day, and that's what I have. So if I could get like, honestly, something I really like the look of is my Apple Watch Series 7. I want to talk about that more in a future video, but I like the display and how thin the bezels are on the Series 7. They're basically the thinnest bezels I've ever seen on any Apple product, and how the display kind of just barely warps over the side. And if they made a whole iPhone with the bezel thickness of the Series 7, basically if they took the same chassis and form factor of like the 11 Pro Max, but then shrunk the bezel to be as thin as the Series 7, I could see myself liking that. It's a really clean look, and it looks a lot more futuristic when the pixels go right to the edge. And they don't quite go right to the edge on this design, but it's still pretty good. Still pretty good. Yeah, Studio Display, the Mac Studio, they're gone. I don't have them anymore. I'm waiting to see what Apple has in store for later in the year. Hopefully they make a 120 hertz monitor. If they don't, I'd probably be looking at either an Eve Spectrum or maybe I'd go back to the Studio Display potentially, but I haven't decided. Because, I love the center stage camera. That is fun. It's a great demo. But especially when I do my live streams like this now, And I'm trying to emulate and get the live broadcast of my content to be as close as possible to the edited form. Then the center stage camera just, it's cool for like walking around the room, but the problem is it just kind of likes to wander a lot. So I can't really use the center stage camera when I'm doing my podcast recordings because when we're doing our podcasts, I'm cut in the middle. So if the center stage camera is wandering off, I'm going to get cut out of frame really easily. And, obviously there was some complaints about the webcam quality. The center stage camera is just not the best looking because you're cropping in a lot with a digital zoom. And with macOS, unfortunately, there's no way to turn that off. And that coupled with the fact that it's a 60 hertz panel, and I've just gotten so used to 120 across all the devices I'm looking at right now. My phone, my iPad is over there, my Mac's over there. All of these have 120 hertz. So when you spoil your eyes with that kind of buttery goodness, everything else just looks choppy. And the studio display did look pretty choppy to me. And it's like, yeah, I can get by with it. It's fine. But if you're spending $2,000 on a monitor, I don't think you should be putting up with those kinds of compromises. I could get those compromises if you were spending a lot less. Like, okay, I spent $200 or $300 on a monitor. And there's some good monitors you can get for that price. Okay, they're not 120 hertz, but hey, they're only $300. But 2,000, that's the kind of money you should be like, all right, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want. And unfortunately, the studio display was not perfect. It wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So I'm still in the market. I'm still thinking about which monitors to get, but I at least want to wait and see if Apple has something planned for a Pro XDR monitor. How much is it going to cost and what are the specifications? Because Ross Young has claimed, despite me disagreeing or not knowing how they would do it over Thunderbolt, but he's claiming Apple's working on a standalone monitor that's got ProMotion. And he has a very reliable track record. So I don't know if I full-heartedly believe it, but I admit that there is probably a greater than 0% chance of him being right. I'm not going to say there's no chance of him being right, but I won't say it's 100% either. It's somewhere in between. It might, for me, I guess it's like a 20-30% likelihood, as in I'm thinking they probably won't, but I know that I'll be very, very incredibly upset if I bought a monitor now and then in a couple months Apple introduced a 120 hertz monitor and now I'm stuck with the old one and I'm outside of my return window and everything. So yeah, it's I'm willing to wait and see because I can get by without one. I don't like desperately need a monitor. It'd be nice. It was nice to have a bigger display to work with that could couple with my MacBook Pro pretty well, and still look clean and look good on a desk and everything. But it's not like a dire need. Like I can't work without one. I got a 75 hertz monitor for $180. Wow, that's a good deal. Any chance you're getting a Pro Display XDR? Not the current one, for sure. I don't like the current one at all. I mean, it's like $6,000, 60 hertz, and there's no speakers or center stage camera or anything, so it's like missing things I liked about the studio display. So no, there's no situation where I end up buying the Pro Display XDR unless someone was willing to sell me one for substantially lower price, but I don't think that's going to happen. If someone was like, I'll sell you my Pro Display for $1,000 or less, then I could see myself buying it, but I don't think that's going to happen. I paid close attention because when I finally went to an Apple store and looked at the Pro Display myself, I was like, this is a good looking monitor. I love how thin the bezels are. It looks really clean and it's a good panel. It's not 120 hertz unfortunately, but it's still a good looking screen. And I was looking around in the used market. I was like, I don't need this to be brand new. Like, how much are these going for? Unfortunately, there's like no depreciation at all. All the Pro Displays are selling for basically the same price as new. If you find them used somewhere, they're usually like $200, $300 cheaper. It's like none of them are substantially cheaper than new. So it's like, why even bother? You think Ross Young is a pseudonym for Tim Cook? Probably, because you cook when you're young. So Ross Tim, basically, if you rearrange the letters in Ross and change the letters, it spells Tim. I think we have confirmation right there. But oh yeah, speaking of the podcast, I just wanted to clarify something for people watching these streams. If you just joined, like Daniel Holloway, good to see you, and you want to recap or rewatch a lot of these live streams, they are available on the podcasting platform. So you can listen to Tailosive Tech podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but you can also listen to the Tailosive Tech streams, which are these on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So just go on your podcasting platform of choice and search Tailosive, and you'll find all the different streaming options. So if you want just the audio version, I download these, convert them into audio files, and upload them to the podcasting services. And there's a decent number of people that do that, but I realize I don't really talk about it much, so I wasn't sure if everybody was aware of it. In 10 years, we'll see them in the flea market. I honestly would. I think that the Pro Display XDR would be a really fun, compelling option if the resale value of them just tanked. You know, like if no one was buying them anymore, Apple discontinues them. They introduce a new mini LED monitor that's way better and way cheaper, and everyone starts buying that instead. And there's basically no reason to buy the Pro Display XDR anymore. If you could find them for sale for like $1,000 or less, it's a really cool. That'd be a really cool setup. You know, just couple it with your MacBook. It's not going to be the greatest monitor in the world, but I don't know. I just think that it would be a really great accessory out there for people who are willing, if the price was just substantially lower, but probably won't happen. Apple has some good bargains out there. AirPods Pro, the entry-level M1 devices are all pretty good bargains, but they do have some absurdities with the wheels and the headphones. Yeah, I would also add to that list the budget iPad. $300. I guarantee you, the everyday consumer, if you show that iPad to your mom or your grandma or someone in your life that's not in this tech community, which, let's be honest, most of you probably know a ton of people like that. That's why you're watching these videos, because you're like me and you don't have any friends. But if you show them that iPad, they're not gonna care that it doesn't have the iPad Pro like bezels. They're not gonna even notice that the display isn't laminated. You just say $300. Here's a 10-inch iPad. It'll get software updates for probably 7 years. Yeah, that's an astoundingly good deal. Especially with the what's it called, certified refurbished. You can go on there, find some iPhone 11s going for under $500. Yeah, I'm not under this belief that Apple has to have high-end luxury devices so that they retain their brand reputation. I'm like, for the most part, you can usually find options from Apple that are really good deals. There's just not much else on the market, I think, that could compare. Can you think of another $300 tablet out there that would be better than the iPad 9 at like anything? Like camera performance, it's got the center stage camera, and the rear camera is honestly not that bad either, and it comes with a fast charger. Comes with a 20-watt USB-C to Lightning cable, and brick, and it's a 10-inch display. No, it's not laminated, but it's still a Retina display, and it has Touch ID. Okay, the home button's a little old now, but whatever. Like, who care? Most people don't care about that kind of thing. And the speaker system's probably not that bad. Lol, what is a friend? I would get a studio display once they have decreased in price in the used market several years from now. Yeah, I'm not against that either. That's part of the reason I'm okay with waiting until later in the year, because I personally think Dub Dub is going to be a big disappointment, and a lot of people are hoping, oh, we'll get an M2 MacBook Air, oh, we'll get a new Mac Pro, and I report on that news because Mark Gurman is reputable and he's gotten a lot of things right, so I'm like, let's talk about it, let's dive into the possibilities, but at the same time, I'm just trying to preface, I hope you guys know, I don't believe that's going to happen. I'm telling you what others are claiming, so that you're in the loop, because a lot of people are asking me sometimes, like, what is Apple's plans for this, or is there any word on this? I just don't want you people thinking like I'm gonna report on the most clickbaity headline possible just so I can get the click and then tell you I don't believe it's gonna happen. I won't report on things that I don't think have a high likelihood of happening. But Mark Gurman has a track record, and he felt pretty confident in his report, so that made me say, well, we should at least talk about it. But I'm disagreeing with the guy who's gotten a lot right. So yeah, I'm in the camp of like this event is going to be all developer and software focused, and then the Macs will come later in the year. And I'm okay waiting for my external monitor because and thank you for your support, Visualizer, for 6 months. Thank you very much. For those who aren't aware, channel members are paying $2 a month, but they get to watch me edit and film my videos in real time, and they get updates on future videos. They get to vote on what video topics I cover next. So I appreciate you guys. It helps me out a ton. So thank you. But if I wait for later in the year and Apple doesn't introduce a new Pro display with mini LED or 120 hertz or something until way later in the year, then it turns out it's $4,000 or $5,000, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of just too much. I'm not willing to throw that much money into a monitor. Then by that point, hopefully there's some sales or some discounts or some used studio displays on the market that are selling for under the price of new. Because while I did enjoy the studio display, I just thought that the price was a little bit too steep to justify those specifications. I think it would be a much more digestible monitor if it was like $1,000 or less. If I could get one for $900 or something like that, I'd be like, oh man, this is a perfect accessory. I'll put up with 60 hertz if the price is that low. But right now, it's a competition for me between the studio display getting cheaper over time and the Eve Spectrum, which I'm not completely sold on, but I've heard some good things from people. They have some quality control issues and that kind of thing, but they are much cheaper. It's like, I think $800 or $900 for a 4K monitor that's 144 hertz, and it looks pretty clean. It doesn't have that stupid, ugly gamer aesthetic that most high refresh rate monitors have. It seems like a good panel and a good monitor that's trying to go for that, minimalist market of like trying to make technology get out of the way, which aligns more with Apple's accessories and Apple's hardware. So I like that. Thank you for the super chat, Karen. Is M1 Studio really that much better than M1 Max? Like not Geekbench, but real world editing and 3D rendering. In my experience, it was not, unfortunately. For my specific workflow, I did not get anything done faster with the M1 Ultra chip versus the M1 Max. Basically, it performed the exact same way, but unfortunately, I think it's because Apple has not software unlocked the Ultra. They tested it, and if you look at the fine print on the website, they were showing the M1 Ultra's Final Cut performance in comparison to the M1 Max with a new version of Final Cut that has not come out yet. And that was, how long ago did that event happen now? 3 weeks ago? Is it almost been a month? Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it? We're almost halfway through April, so... Oh, Dupont, thank you for becoming a supporter. I appreciate that. That's very nice of you. But yeah, I think the M1 Ultra is, I'm sure, faster and would probably perform better in Final Cut in 3D modeling and stuff if the software was optimized for it. But for some bizarre reason, they still haven't really sent out the firmware to really take advantage of that chip yet. So right now it doesn't seem much different or much faster than the M1 Max. I believe it is. I don't think they would stitch two M1 Maxes together just for them to end up performing the same. It's just a weird software delay that they haven't acknowledged or gotten around to fixing yet. But thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. Guys, you're getting spoiled. I've spent $1,000 on a plastic Dell 27-inch 4K. $1,600 for the Pro Display is a bargain. Just because another monitor is a bad deal doesn't make the Studio Display a good deal. I mean, the LG Ultrafine is basically the exact same panel, and you can find that for much cheaper. Again, I don't want to do that because, for one, it's 60 hertz anyway, and for two, I don't like the look of the Ultrafine. I do think that a monitor, something that sits on your desk for a long, long time and something that you're going to spend hours looking at, should look kind of nice. I think it should look pretty. So that's why I'm not terribly interested in all of the gamer high refresh rate monitors out there. Anytime you look up on Amazon a high refresh rate monitor, all you get is this gamer crap of stealth jagged plastic edges and RGB lights and these heavy duty stands that look so obnoxious, and it doesn't go with what I want my setup to look like. And trying to find a monitor that looks good, like the Studio Display, that also has the specs I want, like 120 hertz, is challenging. And the Eve Spectrum is close to exactly what I want. It still has a tiny bit of a chin though. It's very subtle. It's like the thinnest possible definition you can have for a chin. Um, the reason I'm potentially comfortable with putting up with that tiny chin is the fact that the side bezels are even thinner than the Pro Display or the Studio Display. So it's a very thin bezel all the way around, tiny chin on the bottom. So part of me is like, well, if you're using a black background with that wallpaper anyway, it won't be super noticeable. But at least there's no big logo on the front. That's the bigger issue, is when brands and companies put their giant plastic chin with the big logo, and you just can't avoid it. Wish the iMacs looked like the new studio monitor. Me too. They got the A13 chip in there, so just freaking, beef up the thickness a little bit. Turn that studio display into an iMac. Which looks worse, the gaming monitors or the 24-inch iMac? For me, definitely the iMac. I'm sorry. It's like, I get the aesthetic that the gamer monitors are going for. It's a style. It's just not my style. Whereas I just think the 24-inch iMac, I guess it's a style, but it's an ugly style. It's like, for the market that the gaming monitors are catering to, they probably think they look great. People are probably buying those and they're happy with them, and they're like, yeah, it's my epic, stealthy, military grade looking monitor. But the 24-inch iMac is, I don't know. I can't get behind it. I'm sorry. The chin is just too obnoxious. I don't like pastel colors either. If I want something in a particular color, I want it to be the most saturated, like obvious form of that color possible. And then they blast the back of the iMac with as much paint as possible, even though you're never going to see it and it's going to be put up against the wall. And you know how everyone, when the 24-inch iMac came out, was like, well, it's for businesses' reception desks. So, if you're a small business and you're going to have an iMac, you want it to look pretty from the back so it looks cool. And when people walk into your shop, they see your colorful iMac. It's never happened for me. I promise. I've walked around. I've traveled a lot in the past year. I've been to a lot of places. I've been to shops and restaurants in New York City. I've been to Chicago. I've been to Las Vegas. I've been to Puerto Rico. Never once did I see someone with the 24-inch iMac as this is what you see when you walk in the hotel or something. Most hotels are using crappy gateway monitors. They don't care. It's just such a wasteful design, in my opinion. The fact that they gave like a power brick to a desktop iMac just because they wanted it to be thin and light for something that you almost never pick up. It's not meant to be mobile. I'm sorry. Just fundamentally, I can't get behind it. Pastels are very girly. I don't know if that's the terminology I was going for. It's just not for me. Some people like pastels. Some people like the light colors and the, barely blue and just a slight bit green. Some people like that. I'm not like that. I'm a saturated guy. I'm not even terribly happy with the graphite on my phone. This was just the closest I could get to matte black, which is what I wanted, and then they didn't do it. But all the other colors I didn't really care for either. The gamer monitor goes well with your gaming chair. Honestly, I'm not even in love with the gaming chair anymore. It squeaks a lot, and there's parts of it that are breaking. So I might look into another chair in the future too. I like PewDiePie, but yeah. When I traveled abroad, the amount of people I saw in international U.S. airports with the new iMacs was insane. Really? I mean, I didn't travel outside the U.S., but I did go. I took 8 flights in like 2 months. We flew to. We went from SFO to DC to San Juan and back through Chicago, and then we flew from JFK to Seattle and then back down. Never once did I see one, to be honest. Thank you for the super chat, Karen. She says, I wish my MacBook Pro had RGB backlit keyboard. Like, give me the option to choose between normal and RGB. Choosing system preferences. Perfect. Yeah, Apple could easily add that via an over-the-air software update. Why don't they? Ignore iPadOS. iPadOS is fine, right? There's no problems with iPadOS. But what we really need is macOS to get more RGB. Let's see. I have yet to see a 24-inch iMac outside of an Apple store. Same. I'm in the same camp, Margel. Other than, I guess, there was one at my friend's house, at Mike's house. But I'm still convinced he bought that just to spite me. He bought it because he knew it would upset me. Do you think you could survive a month only using the iPad Mini 6? No, I'm pretty sure I would die. Yeah, I would just, heart would stop, eyes would go blind. I can't look at something that's 60 hertz for that long. I'm sorry, it just can't happen. No, of course. No, I love the iPad Mini 6. I love reviewing it. I loved reviewing it. It's a very nice form factor, and I designed my thumbnails on it and stuff. The only thing is just the 60 hertz, and I've been used to my iPads being 120 hertz for 5 years now. That was the first device I got 120 hertz on, was an iPad Pro back in 2017. So I've just gotten so used to that form factor and that screen size being buttery smooth with that OS. So for the first time in 5 years, I never reviewed the iPad Air, mind you, and I never reviewed the budget iPad that came out after 2017. I talked about them, and Apple announced them, and I cover it in the video. But I was like, yeah, it's an old budget iPad. I don't care. So I went like straight almost 5 years only using an iPad with 120 hertz, and then suddenly, as my iPhone was getting 120 hertz, because remember, I unboxed the iPad Mini 6 alongside my 13 Pro Max. I unboxed them both, and I just gotten 120 hertz OLED on my phone, and I was like, wow, this is really smooth. It looks so nice. And I was comparing it to my iPad, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then picked up the iPad Mini 6. Okay, let's review this now. 60. It's like, ooh, your eyes notice it instantly. It just becomes really, really obvious. So that's my only problem. That's just my only single issue with it. I was even fine with Touch ID on the power button. I did not find that a big deal. The A15 chip is still plenty fast for what an iPad is capable of doing. I love the Type-C. The speaker quality was good. It was a nice form factor. It was just a comfortable iPad. And I think I would have genuinely kept it and kept using it if it was 120 hertz. Seriously. Like, it could fit in my pocket, and it was really easy to type on. And I just think that's such a good form factor for tablets. It's really a shame it doesn't sell better, because I wish Apple would make like a pro version of the iPad Mini that was more expensive but could have better hardware, specifically with the display. But because it doesn't sell that well, it probably won't happen. But yeah, I could survive. Let's see. I saw a bunch of 24-inch iMacs at my school in the video production room. Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine the SD card adapters that stupid school had to buy in the production room, because they filled it with iMacs, and none of them have SD card slots, and they got to put up with all those adapters in the back, and all those Thunderbolt ports, and all those power bricks sitting on the floor. Just an entire lab of power bricks sitting around. All those chins. Oh, I'm sorry. It just sounds disgusting. Let's see. I've been using a personal hotspot a lot on my 13 Pro Max. The battery life on that iPhone is amazing. I've been tethering it to an iPad Mini 6 around Manhattan today. Wow. Well, that's good. I guess I occasionally do it with my iPhone, but normally I don't take my iPad or MacBook away from home all that often, so there's either Wi-Fi around. But yeah, the battery life on the Pro Max is seriously overkill. I do not need this much battery. It's overkill for me. I know other people that can still kill this in a day, though. Would you have got the green 13 Pro if it was available at launch? Green's not my color. It's a good color for other people. Like my friend Randy, he's all into the green ecosystem. He's got a green Tesla, he's got a green phone and a green watch, and they're all pretty much the same shade. And it's perfect for him. We should call him 50 Shades of Green. But for me, it's it's not my favorite, not my kind of color. It's just, even if it was available at launch, my favorite color out of the spectrum is like a deep solid red. Despite my emphasis on the blue on the channel, I wanted a bunch of different colors for the different channels in the Tailosive network, and at the same time I was starting Tailosive Gaming, which is dead now, but I figured gaming had the best shot at succeeding because gaming was the most popular at that time on YouTube, and I think still is. So I was like, well, if my favorite color is red, and there's a good chance that gaming might end up doing the best out of the network, I'm gonna make the gaming channel my favorite color, which is red. And my next favorite color was blue, So I was like, well, I kind of like tech stuff. Maybe tech will do okay. So I made tech blue, and it also just went with a lot of Apple things are blue, like the iMessage bubbles and like emails and buttons within iOS are all blue, and the highlight text is blue, and Apple support app is blue. There's a lot of blue throughout Apple's ecosystem, so I just thought that would go well with the tech channel. And then of course tech did really really well and gaming flopped. So if I could do the whole thing over again, maybe I would have given red to tech, but that just feels wrong now. I feel like Tailosive Tech has been blue for so long, I can't change it. It wouldn't feel right. Um, let's see. It's the Randy phone. Yeah, I call it Randy green. There's like Rivians of that color too, that are of that like darker green shade, and I'm just like, yep, that would be Randy. Randy would get that one. Um, I don't do merch anymore. No, we stopped doing that last year, partly because I wasn't really making that much off of it anyway, and that was kind of intentional. I just really didn't want to be the kind of guy that was always plugging merch, and I was starting to get annoyed. I'm not gonna name names or anything, but I watch a lot of YouTube. I watch more YouTube than anything, and I was getting tired of every channel having a merch page because when they do, it starts to become a bigger portion of their income and their revenue, and then it becomes more important for them. So that means that when there's new merch drops, they have to tell you about it, and everyone has to say, "Hey, by the way, new merch," or "Check out the new merch, check out the new merch." And I was like, okay, at a certain point, there's just too much. We've already got sponsorships in videos. We've already got people telling you about the same VPN a billion times, or the same Skillshare ad, or that, I put up enough with that. And now on top of the sponsorship, and I pay for YouTube Premium. You guys are putting up with even more because there's a lot of you that probably don't have Premium and have to watch commercials and ads on YouTube. So there's a commercial and an ad, and then the video starts, and then they tell you about their merch, and then they end it with another VPN sponsorship. It's like, ugh. At a certain point, we just got to draw the line. I just was really insistent ever since we started selling merch. I was like, I did not want most of my, not most, but I did not want a big chunk of my income coming from merch. Because if it got to the point where merch was such a large portion of my income that it was like, I was going to take a hit if I didn't sell a certain amount, then I knew I would be fairly incentive to like tell you guys like, hey, by the way, let's keep in mind, we got a new merch drop. Plus there's too many clothes in the world as is. There's a lot of clothes and merch that end up in landfills, and there's a lot of people that buy way more clothes than they need, so they have too much, and they, some of them get donated and some of them just get thrown away. So if I ever did merch again, I would absolutely want to do it through a company that has sustainable business practices, and is trying to use as much recycled material as possible. But for the most part, I'm just like, there's enough people selling merch, and I'm not inherently that good at graphic design or coming up with logos. And if someone else designs the logos, then they're going to want a cut of the business, and that just makes life more complicated for payouts and taxes and stuff. So I'm just like, I don't need to be that guy. I think it's okay if someone doesn't want to advertise something on a piece of clothing. You notice that's why I've kind of switched to neutral clothing in more recent histories, because I used to plug the merch and I used to sell merch on the channel and stuff, and kind of every video I wanted to be wearing a different shirt that people could buy. And to the people that did, I am incredibly grateful. I'm very thankful for everybody who bought merch when I had it. You did help me out and you supported me, and I'm really glad that you did. But at the same time, I'm like, do we need like every square inch of a video to be an ad? Do we need every second to be plugging something? And I'm sure some of you already get sick of me when I mention memberships or stuff like that. But I just thought that was a much more direct and personal way, rather than me trying to sell you a piece of clothing that you might wear once and then never again, or a bunch of shirts for you to add to your collection. How about we just keep the prices lower and get to interact more? We can improve our relationship that way. Ads make the world go. They're a necessary evil. It's true. But that doesn't mean the world should be just ads. There's a balance there. And I'm trying to offset the balance a little bit, because I know that a lot of the channels you guys are watching alongside of me are kind of bombarding you with ads and merch and sponsorships, and I'm like, okay, well, let's try to go a little bit in the opposite direction so you guys don't feel so overwhelmed. Um, for Christmas, you could change your profile pics red. Yeah, maybe. You're a very blue person, aren't you, Drew? I feel like outside of the tech channel stuff, not really. But yeah, I guess there's a lot of blue here. Do not test drive a Tesla. You will hate your current car with passion. Yep, I can attest to that, Jacob. Um, let's see. I still have hope that the next version of iPadOS there will be major changes for the better, at least more features that really take advantage of the M1. If it's anything like Mark Gurman's been saying, sounds kind of boring so far. In his Power On newsletter, he was like, they're gonna spread and diversify more on the focus modes, and they would change iOS 16 notifications. Okay, they tinker notifications a little bit every single year. I don't know what they're gonna do to it this year, but can I be honest for a minute? I don't really use the focus modes. It was kind of interesting when they showcased it. This is your work mode. This is your sleep mode. This is your driving mode. Maybe it's just because I've kind of grown up with, maybe a different use case because I have a following on YouTube and Twitter a little bit and Discord. So I turn notifications off for most apps, and I'm kind of in the mindset of like, I will check those apps if I need to know something. Like if I'm curious of what's going on Twitter, I'll open Twitter. If I want to know what's going on Discord, I'll open Discord. If I'm not looking at Discord or Twitter, I do not need to be pinged, notified, or buzzed through the watch or whatever that something is going on there because I can check it later. So I think kind of just my natural way of using my phone is like a healthy focus mode, because pretty much the only notifications I get are texts these days or phone calls. And if I want to mute those, then I turn on Do Not Disturb. And that's kind of it. I get what they were going for, and I'm sure there are people that have uses for focus modes, especially if they collaborate a lot with fellow workers at their job or their office. Because the concept with focus modes is that you could like mute certain notifications and unmute others. So maybe these people can text you during these hours, but then these people can't, or if they do, you won't get notified for it. I just don't have that. I'm like, if anybody who has my phone number, which is not all of you, of course, I don't share that publicly, but if there's someone in my personal life who has my phone number, I want them to be able to reach me anytime. Like, I want to, if there's something going on, if it's a friend inviting me to something or an emergency, or, they want to say, hey, I need to get a hold of you, I want to get notified for that. Yeah. If I'm live or something like I am right now, or I'm in a situation where I can't take a phone call or a text because maybe I'm on a video call or I'm interviewing somebody, then I just turn on Do Not Disturb. I don't change my notifications much throughout the day. So or at night people have a sleep thing and that shuts off all notifications, but then I'm like, isn't that just Do Not Disturb? So yeah, I would be curious if you guys have found much good use for it, because I know my lifestyle and my workflow is probably not the norm. It's not what most people have. And I know some of you are probably students and some of you are working. So just tell me exactly like how you utilize your focus modes if you do, because I do not. No, I don't use the bedtime settings because my bedtime is constantly fluctuating anyway. Sometimes we stay up late. Sometimes we go to bed early. It changes. You like the blue 10R, no? Yeah, that was good. It wasn't the phone I used most of the year, but that was... I think I got the blue... Why didn't I get the red 10R? I'm trying to remember. I thought the blue looked really cool. I think it was because it matched the channel. I was like, the blue 10R will go good for Tailosive Tech because we're a blue channel, but if I was actually buying an iPhone 13 or something for my daily usage, I would rather have the red one. Same with the 10R. If I had to buy a 10R for some reason, I would get the red one. They should rename Do Not Disturb off to Disturb. I like that concept. Let me turn off Do Not Disturb. Oh, okay. So you'd like to be disturbed? That makes sense. Let's see. Would So get merch, though? I know. There was a lot of people that were upset when we got rid of it. But I'll be honest with you. The merch I have to offer is just not as good as other channels' merch. I don't need to lie. I can be transparent with you guys. Like, I came up with some logo designs for merch, and sometimes fans would submit designs. But for the most part, what Marquez has got going on looks awesome, and probably way more time and thought is put into that, and the artwork and the logos and stuff looks way cooler. So I'm just gonna tell you, buy someone else's merch if you want to buy tech merch of some kind, because there's some really creative ones on other channels' pages that I don't know. It's, link them down below if you've bought, I don't know, some other channel's tech merch that you really liked. I'm sure Linus has got something going down. I'm sure. Um, who is it? Who else is out there? Nikias Molina's probably got some decent merch, but it's fine. It simplifies things on my end to not have to worry about that kind of stuff. So I am not in the business of trying to get everybody to wear clothing with a logo that I designed. This channel is just a good way for me to interact with people that are interested in the same stuff I'm in. I want to get to the point where I know it's impossible because I'm a content creator and I can't talk to how many 127 people in the real world all at the same time. So there's always going to be that barrier of the display and the chat, but for the most part, I'm trying to emulate like how I would talk and interact with my friend best I could, and I don't go to my friends and tell them to buy my merch. That's just not what I do. Oh, I should make candles. There you go. Miguel says, I built a focus mode for studying. The only home screen I have enabled has educational related apps. Snapchat and YouTube are hidden, so I resist the urge to check them on my own. Yeah, I guess I can understand that. I just don't relate to it in my personal life because I pretty much like either I know it's not a good time to check the app, so I don't check it, or I have a spare moment, so I do check it. Because social media apps or smartphone apps in general can become addicting. But I don't know how the focus mode would eliminate the temptation for me, because if I really want to look, I can go look. Um, but I don't know. Maybe the modes are in my head. I'm just like, yeah, now's not a good time to look at that, so I'm just not going to look at it. Knowing that I could turn off the focus mode and go in and find the app anyway, knowing me, if I was in the situation where I'm like, yeah, I want to know how this latest video is performing, so I'm going to check the analytics. I'm just going to go check the analytics if I have a spare moment. And if I realize that I don't have a spare moment, then I just won't look. I don't know. I guess I don't see the point of baking that into the OS, but Rory says, I use focus mode sometimes to stop phone calls during class and when I really need to focus on getting some work done. Is that different from do not disturb, though? That's what I can't figure out. Like, what's the difference between a class focus mode and you just saying, I don't want to be disturbed by something, so I just turn on do not disturb? I get the point of that, like silencing notifications during a time where you need to be focused. That's fine. But the concept of having different modes outside of do not disturb, where you get notified for certain things but not other things, and it changes throughout the day. I've used the work focus mode, I admit, in that do not disturb one when I really don't want notifications. Okay. I'm on Reddit again, and those notifications can get so annoying. So glad I'm not on Twitter anymore, because that was brutal too. I just don't understand why the concept of leaving notifications off of an app is so complicated. It's like, we have our phones with us so much these days, guys. It's not like you leave your phone in the other room, and if someone tags you on Twitter, you need to know about it right this second. It's like, just leave the notifications off. You can come to Twitter unless you, I don't know, need it for work or something. Maybe it's a bit different because for a lot of my life now, I've been, a content creator with an audience, so I've had to manage notifications. Otherwise, I could never have Twitter notifications on because I'd be pinged constantly throughout the day. So I just leave it off entirely. There's not a portion of the day where I turn it on or anything. It's just like, if I want to know what's going on Twitter, I'll check. And that's when I'll get back to you if you interact with me on Twitter. And if I don't have time for it, then I won't get notified for it. So yeah, especially with social media apps, whether it be like Instagram or Reddit or something, it's like, why do we need notifications on for these things at all? Your phone is going to be probably somewhere nearby you every day, all day, unless you're at work, in which case the notification's probably going to be useless anyway. So I use the do not disturb while driving feature. That's really the only focus mode I use, and it's not really a focus mode. See, normally I'm driving with my wife, so if someone's texting me and I want to respond, I'll just basically I'll get a text and I'll be like, someone texted me, can you check my phone? And she'll just pick up the phone, say who it was, and I tell her to respond with this. So that's why I guess we don't use the do not disturb while driving thing. Alvin says, I use do not disturb in personal. Okay. Having focus mode on your MacBook worked weird for me. Yeah, I kind of miss the fact that they used to be independent. Now the focus mode is everything's unified. So if I turn on do not disturb on my laptop, it turns it on my iPad and my phone too. And I used to just want to mute one device, not all of them. But I'm sure that's a setting. You can probably turn that off. I just don't care. Rory says, I don't need to put the apps on the screen. The main thing is the notification, which interrupts me. I only allow the ringer to go off for certain people like family where I know it's important. I guess there's just... Maybe in my personal life, there's not that many people that I'm like, I don't want to get notified for. It's like, if they have my phone number, they're important enough that I do want to get notified when I get texted by them, which is usually a family or a friend. There's not a lot of people that I give my phone number to, but I'm like, I don't want to get your notification, but I do want to get so-and-so's notification in any particular circumstance. To me, it's pretty much like an on or off thing. It's like I either want 0 notifications from texts or everybody. You know, if you need to talk to me, you can talk to me. Yeah, I'm sure you can disable it. I don't like how focus mode syncing between all devices is an all or none. Yeah, you can. Okay, good. We can clear that up, Michael Pepper. I don't use focus modes either. Physical mute switch plus do not disturb always did the trick for me. My phone is always on mute, by the way. I pretty much never unmute my phone. Just because I don't... There's never been a situation where I've wanted my phone to make a noise for a notification. You know, noise is for watching a YouTube video, of course. But, like, I've never... Whether I'm by myself, having dinner at a friend's house, or driving, I never want the phone to go bing! You know, it's annoying when other people's phones do it. It really annoys me. And that's why I love the Apple Watch so much, which I also leave on mute because it's always on my wrist. So when it taps me, that's my notification. I'll get a tap and I'll go, okay, let me check. That is just so much more elegant and less obnoxious and unobtrusive than any number of devices that want to make a sound every time they notify you. I could get maybe wanting the sound if you don't have a watch because your phone might be at a table or somewhere else in the room, so you want to hear it go off. But usually even the taptic feedback is loud enough for you to feel it in your pocket or even hear it on a table. If you get a text, it boop boop, you know, it makes a noise. So yeah, I'm not a alert notifications guy. But yeah, this is, of course, just like any live stream, the subjects flow depending on the chat, what you guys ask about. We started with talking about Mac shipments growing, but of course can't talk about that for a whole stream. It's just meant to kick it off. But it's getting close to dinner time. I'm sorry, Archibong. That's a cool name. I'm sorry you just joined, but I'm gonna have to sign off now. But keep in mind, you can listen to these as an audio form over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, along with the Tailosive Tech podcast. There's Tailosive Tech streams. So you can catch the whole stream over there while you're driving or in your podcasting app of choice. And, okay, I gotta agree with Marngel Heel. I gotta read this message with Marngel. Despite Apple having pretty good customization for notifications already, Android fans still say Android has better notification management. What does Android do that's better than iOS when it comes to notification? I'm not really sure what they're going off of now. Maybe it's just... I've always felt the complete opposite. Whenever I get an Android phone, notifications are stuffed to the brim with alerts that I do not care about and never turned on, but they just leave them on by default, whereas iOS at least asks me if I want notifications on, and I always say no. But yeah, I don't really grasp what Android notifications are getting so much better on. But thank you all for tuning in and for the super chats. It's always a delight. And what did my wife cook? Probably egg fried rice, I think, is what we're having tonight. But thank you all for watching. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Bye-bye.